All right, everybody, welcome back to another episode of Ole Miss After Dark. Me and Hitch working overtime, bringing you show number 3 here since Thursday. So, really burning the midnight oil here. We had another guest lined up for us, Peter Bartell, Pigskin Petey on Twitter. I'm sure most of y'all have seen him on there. All the articles he writes. He does several about Ole Miss, but he covers a lot of the SEC. Has a lot of thoughts on a lot of SEC teams, which is really funny considering you're a Syracuse fan, right? That's the one thing that I learned about you in the first time that you joined me last year before the season, right? Was you were a big Syracuse fan. We actually had a little bit of a back and forth. What was that? Probably about 2-3 weeks ago about Syracuse with the Donovan McNabb era and Dwight Freeney and Marvin Harrison and all those guys, right? So just kind of catch people up. How did you get back down or get down into the South and get into SEC football the way you have?
Just moved down here, right, after being sick of the cold up north, but grew up, my parents had season tickets to Syracuse University football, so my sister and I always went to games, and I'm grateful for that, right, because in the 90s, Syracuse had a lot of, they were really good. I mean, I saw Tennessee's national title team come through with T. Martin one year and Peerless Price, and Michigan with Tom Brady one year, SEC teams otherwise, Oklahoma, Auburn, Alabama, they all came through. So then when I came down here, right, I already had the bug. Everybody else up north still doesn't have the bug to this day with the SEC and college football. But living down here, you can't help but be involved in it. And, I knew from a young age because of those experiences, like what cool football was, cool tailgates, cool atmosphere, like meaningful, passionate football. And that's how I, kind of got down here and remain involved with college football.
Yeah. So we're going to talk about Ole Miss a lot here in this show, obviously, like we always do. We're also going to get Peter's thoughts on the SEC as a whole, playoff team, stuff like that towards the end. But one thing I wanted to ask you about here today, I remember seeing an article you wrote probably about 3 months ago, maybe a little more, I can't remember, about Suntarine Perkins at Ole Miss and the impact he can make on this defense. And me and Hick talked with Zach Morath on Friday. We talked about both lines of scrimmage, offensive and defensive line. So with you writing that article on Suntarines, I thought this was a good opportunity for us to look at the linebacker core here because I think this is a group that has a lot to prove. I think it's a position that needs to be good for Ole Miss to reach the heights it needs to. And I think we have a ton of players at that position, including Suntarine Perkins, Paul coming in from Arkansas, Raymond Collins, Corey Coleman, a really good pass rusher, transferred from Baylor a couple years ago, played for us last year as well. This is just a position that has a lot of guys that has the potential to be a really good group. What do you think about this linebacking core here at Ole Miss?
I fully agree. Position-wise, player-wise, talent-wise. I'm going to say some things that Ole Miss fans probably don't like here, but position-wise, player-wise, do not get me wrong. Across the board with this defense, linebacker and beyond, you guys are stellar. You're knockout. There's no questions asked. And it's not just because of the accolades, so to speak, from these transfer portal guys that have come in, like what they were recruited, ranked in the portal, what they were ranked in high school, aka Walter Nolan kind of thing. But their production at the college level, right? Like Chris Paul 2 years ago, specifically with Arkansas, had a stellar year. And then Suntarine Perkins is like high school accolades. I think according to On3, it was like the 18th overall prospect in the country coming out. TJ Daugherty, Clemson, an absolute stud from everything I've been hearing in camp. Showed out in the one opportunity he got last year at linebacker after he had to sit out the whole year. But when he played Penn State, he showed why the Big Ten is the Big Ten and the SEC is the SEC. So he should be – I did hear Stephen Willis. I know you guys are friends, but he on his show, he was talking about how Daugherty is projected to be the Mike linebacker. Like there's a competition for that spot, but that's a good thing between him and I guess Chris Paul. But both will be on the field, right? To your point. And then Tom Vandeford, I was listening to him with Steven. He made a great point. Just as a defense overall, guys like Suntarine Perkins we're talking about, and Suntarine I think will play a good bit, right? But it's other guys like they use William Eccles as one example. high recruit. In years past, Ole Miss had to play guys like that as true freshmen or early on. Now you don't. Those guys, I love the point by Tom, because he was just like, we can sit those guys, you being we, like, you can sit those guys, have them develop, get stronger, learn the system. You don't have to rely on them plug and play year one, which is how it's always been, quite frankly.
Yeah.
Yeah,
it's huge to be able to have them develop, right, without having to go to war every week, in the trenches against another SEC team, number one squad, right? They can develop the way that their coach would love for them to develop, is late playing time, late in the game when you're either up or down, and then in practice. And yeah, it's a really good point that, just goes something that Diz and I have talked about a couple of times, is what we really feel like separates this Ole Miss team from every other talented Ole Miss team that there's been over the past 20, 40 years, whatever, is the depth. And there's not a drop in production from team A to team B. And that, I know it's something I've never seen on an Ole Miss team in the 40 years that I've been watching, right? And so it's a great feeling. And so, and that's what gives us that hope that we're going to be making that 12-team playoff.
You know what, Hitch, it reminds me of what you just said, is 2 team examples for, we'll call them both dynasties. We'll go with 3 because I just thought of a third. One is recent, Alabama, right? When they're second and third strings, to your point. They could sit there. They weren't starting as freshmen. You had a diamond in the rough like a Will Anderson every blue moon. But realistically, they're waiting their turn, right? And then you got your second and third strings, like you just said, like, you're not used to that. That's where you are, though. That's the exciting 100%. Thing. The other team examples, less recently, USC, when they were killing it back in the day with Pete Carroll, had second stringers that ended up on NFL rosters, probably starting by the end of their tenure. And then the third team would be the Miami Hurricanes when they were killing it in the 80s, 90s, and early 2000s.
I would say twice, actually. 2 different times.
Yeah. So it's exciting. Like one of the guys I interact with, his name is Tommy, in a space frequently. He's a Canes fan, and he was talking about, I think it was Sean Taylor that was second string. With the Canes when he first got there, and that's freaking Sean Taylor, so that's the level that you guys are approaching.
Yeah, I mean, and it's something that, Ole Miss has always been able to have top tier talent at the skill positions, right? I mean, wide receiver, whatever you want to say, a guy to throw it to, especially, probably since Bo Wallace on, we've had a guy that can sling it. But it's been those next guys in line. What happens if somebody goes down and gets hurt, right? Like we don't have, and now it's almost just like, oh, okay, well, just reload and we're ready to go. We're coming right back at you.
QB is no different. You got one of the best QB rooms in the country. I mean, I don't think anybody wants Dart to go down, but geez, the fact that your second string quarterback is a competition is not a bad thing, like it is for some programs. Like, you got 2 elite guys right now, and I just wrote an article on that. Like, to me, that's probably the most fascinating position battle that will probably carry into the season for Ole Miss, the backup QB battle, because presumably that's who's it in 2025.
Yeah, that's definitely a position I think will carry, or a battle that will carry on throughout the season, with more than likely, unless something really unfortunate happens with Dart, you'll never get a solid answer to. Because it's setting up as this really big battle in 2025 for who's going to take over this program between Walker Howard and Austin Simmons. Then we've got a true freshman Maddox there as well, a guy that is super, super talented that I know the coaches really like. So that's going to be interesting to see. But kind of peeling back to the linebacker position right now, this is the one area where we don't have a ton of depth at, but I think we have a lot of high-level players. Perkins is a guy that can play that outside linebacker, and he can cover the wide receivers, the running backs in coverage. I think he is an absolute game changer coming off the edge, though, rushing the passer. I think that's something that we're really going to need from him. And when you mix that with Walter Nolan, Princess Umamale, Jared Ivey, J.J. Pegues, those kind of guys at the defensive line, if you're able to bring a guy like Perkins off the edge to create more pressure with those four guys, but then still have the trust of Dodery and Pooh Paul, Corey Coleman, those guys behind them to clean up whatever's left.
Right.
I think that's where this defense has a chance to take that next step from, so last year, the big talking point was our defense was so bad the year before that, 90 something in the country. Well, if we can make the jump up into the, 55, 56 area nationally, then we could have a good year. And that happened. And you see us go on and win 11 games for the first time.
Yeah.
Now, if you're able to take another step and get that defense into the top 20, top 25 with the offense that we have, now you're talking about a team that can compete for a national championship.
That's perfectly stated. With Perkins, one thing I'm looking for this year, because this will be his true sophomore season, right?
Correct.
So,
Yes.
He played running back in high school in addition to linebacker, which I think is a good thing, because now he has understood, or he understands the running back, the offensive side of the ball too, right? Because the running back is like in it. You're not a receiver out wide, like you're right behind the offensive line. You're a skilled player in that offense. Like, the inner workings on the offensive side of the ball. And the other thing too, I think that's overlooked is like offensive linemen, they all have certain hand placements, movements, everything like that. If you are a linebacker, as Perkins is now for Ole Miss, but you've been on and experienced, even though it was the high school level, both sides of the ball, like you understand movements and tendencies maybe more so than a guy only ever on the defensive side of the ball would. And I think that's pretty invaluable, that Perkins can have that knowledge, and also as an actual running back, like knowing how a running back moves, maybe even more so because he's been that, you know what I mean? And I can't help myself, because at SEC Media Days, they talked about Harold Perkins maybe playing other positions like running back, just, off the cuff. But hey, man, what about Centurion and with his high school background at Ole Miss sometime? Heck, with the injuries Texas just had in their backfield, I wrote an article on maybe Ryan Wingo going to running back, because I mean, that's wild. But that position change or two-way player thing is becoming a trend.
Look, man, there is not a play that isn't available in Lane Kiffin's playbook at any point. I love it, right? I love it. If I see him run on the field and line up in running back, man, I'm probably going to lose my mind. But that defense, the point about that defense that is, I think, has a lot of people so excited is just all three levels now are really, really good. In the past, we've had good front, but not at the same time as we've had the others. And that front that we have is going to take so much pressure off of that linebacking core, because they're going to be able to get pressure on to the quarterback, and they're going to be able. They're going to have two offensive linemen are going to have to block at least one of those guys. Yeah. Every play, and then on the flip side, the linebackers are going to be able to take pressure off of that defensive line, because you're probably going to have a guy pick up a blitz, right? And so one of your defensive linemen is going to lose that double team. And so just the way, there's no soft spot in the defense. And that's what has me excited about watching it this year.
I fully agree. And talent wise, right? That's what we were saying at every level. You got it. Trey Amos secondary, that loaded linebacking core, Walter Nolan, Ivy on the line, Unamielen, everybody. I mean, you got it. Piggies. But here's the devil's advocate, right? I know this because I just watched Bama year over year when Golding was there. There was a regression in their defense. Now, when I say regression, to be fair, I'm comparing him to like their last DC was what, Pruitt and Kirby Smart. So let's be fair here. And I loved your point, Dids. He did improve them. Last year, I looked at the stats. You guys were 59th overall nationally, points per game, which was a big improvement from the year prior. Chris Partridge, your DC, before Golding.
Yes, that would
Partridge,
have been
Durkin. It was Durkin and Partridge. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, Durkin, Partridge, and then
so
Golding. Yeah.
with and it's Alabama, so it's different. But their national average dipped a bit, like from when he showed to when he left. And the last year, the only year, and the last year that he was at Bama, their takeaways per game average was 0.9. The only year it was under 1. Every other year it was 1.3 or up, pretty much. I'm not saying that's going to be Ole Miss, because I think there's two things here. A, Bama didn't have an offensive-minded coach like Ole Miss does in Lane Kiffin. Lane Kiffin is going to be hands off the defense for the most part because he's offensive-minded, right? He's just different. However, Hitch said, like, there's no stone unturned with this guy. That's the great thing. So if he sees shortcomings on defense, he can pound the ball. You guys are balanced, despite what people want to say. Look at the numbers. It's freaking balanced. It's not pass heavy. So Kiffin, and he has a stable of backs deeper than last year, even with the loss of Kuchan. So I think he will notice that and be able to just, look, let's pound the rock. We got the O-line to do it anyways. Let's kill clock and win games different ways, right? When he sees those shortcomings. But the thing that I just worry about is, like, I'm just going off the numbers, and that was the thing in Bama, and the knock on Bama, why Bama fans didn't really embrace him, is they felt like he made it too complicated, dropping guys like Will Anderson back into coverage and everything instead of keeping it status quo. And I have heard that some Ole Miss players have commented and said it's tough to get. Once you get it, it's good, but the defense is kind of complex. And that's the only concern. But I think the talent on defense individually, like Hitch said, it's all over, could supersede that and make up for that. And then Kiffin being such an offensive mind like he is. And then lastly, as well, like Golding, the thing is, like, if he what I'm really going to look for is week 1. I know you play Furman, right? But they have that triple option style type offense like Army, Navy, Air Force. And that traditional, right? I want to see you guys will win easy, obviously.
Right.
But I want to see how the communication looks. I want to see, do guys look out of place? Is there a few plays where there is disconnect, obviously, on defense? Granted, it's week 1, right? But like that style, that's a good thing, though. Like,
that was the point. Yeah, that's a great point. I'm actually writing it down. Like that's a very good offense to find that out, right? If you're looking for that and you're wanting to see the communication, because in that option style offense, I mean, communication is key. You have to stay in your lanes or you're going to get eat up. And so that's almost a perfect week 1 to see that what you're looking for.
It would have been the same last year. Georgia Tech still had Paul Johnson early,
Perfect. That's the thing. But you're 100% right, though, especially with the new helmet communications and stuff like that. They're still trying to figure that out in Oxford, who's going to wear that defensively,
right?
Whether that's going to be Dodery or Paul, probably a mixture of the two, but you can only have one on there at the same time. Kind of going back to Golding real quick, with Alabama fans not liking him and the regression that he had that they always talked about. To be fair, you're also talking about the defense that was consistently the number 1 defense in the entire country year after year after year after year, right? The super high expectations there on that Alabama defense. And like you said, he wasn't playing for an offensive-minded head coach that was letting him just let loose and do what he wanted to. Nick Saban was very hands-on. Lane Kiffin's not that way. This is Golding's defense. He's going to let him. He's going to let him succeed or crash and burn on his own. One of the two. One of the two will happen, and it'll be all him there. But we don't need him to be number 1 defense in the country good. We need him to be top 25, maybe top 20 defense good. And they brought in guys, length, size, strength, all of that hopefully get that done for us.
Perfect. Yep, agree fully.
Yeah.
Because that's what, on offense, Bama did have some great offenses. We know this. Like, with those receivers in 2020, but honestly,
especially when Lane Kiffin was running it.
Yeah, exactly. But like, they had a lot of years where it was like, okay, Trent Richardson, Mark Ingram, Derrick Henry, like bell cow, bulldoze, win games one way.
Oh yeah,
manage on offense, and that was it. And it doesn't have to be that way with Ole Miss. I agree. I think, like, let's call it a drop. 20-30 overall with your defense, improvement for Ole Miss, and they're way better than Alabama would have ever been on offense because of Kiffin.
That's going to play this year for us. That's going to win tons of games for us. So really excited to get it started. Before we dive into the potential playoff teams for the SEC, what are your thoughts on Ole Miss overall this year? What are you looking for them? Do you expect them to go, get to that 10-2 number? That seems to always be the number that we're looking for to get into the playoffs. And I think that'll be a good enough number to get in the playoffs since we're starting at number 6 in the country in the AP poll. It does matter where you start, right? Because you're not going to get hurt as bad by losses. You're not having to try to claw your way back into it. We're already in it. We just got to keep things, on the tracks. I think 10-2 gets us there, gets us in the playoffs. Do you think Ole Miss can get to that number?
Yes, absolutely. And last year I was wrong on your record, so I hope I'm not wrong again. Last year I was wrong. I'll call myself out. I predicted you guys 8-4 preseason. So way out.
No, that totally.
And I remember when I did it, Stephen Willis tweeted me back, and he was like he was nice about it, but he was very very passionate about his reply, and that he did not agree, and he was right. At the game, I see 10-2. So I had one of the folks that writes with me, John McCooch, just wrote an article we released on games Ole Miss will lose this year, and he had them at 10-2, losing to LSU and Georgia. So fair. Whether you want to nitpick, what games they lose or whatever, but I think 10-2 is a really good record. I mean, looking at your schedule now,
I think the 4 games that me and Hitch always point out, our first big one that just scares the hell out of us is traveling to Columbia, South Carolina, because that is directly in front of that trip to Baton Rouge to play LSU. Right, that's a classic trap game right there. That's one that we've talked about 100 times, it seems like, on the shows. That South Carolina game, obviously LSU, and then you've got home games against Oklahoma and Georgia. Those aren't going to be easy games either. Those seem to be the 4 games that come up most with me and Hitch. He's more worried about a trip to Gainesville than I am. I think Florida's going to be out of it. And
worried isn't the right word.
You're more worried than I am, because I'm not worried at all about it. You think there's a chance that there's something there if they're able to. And look, it's a fair point. If they're able to get momentum going and weather that incredibly tough schedule that they have, then sure, it's more difficult then. I just don't think they have it in them to weather that schedule. But those 4 games in Columbia, in Baton Rouge, and then at home against Oklahoma and Georgia, I think those are the 4 games that are going to define the season for Ole Miss.
I fully agree. I don't see Florida being a tough but road games, right? I agree more on South Carolina.
That's the thing.
But one thing, just since we've been talking now, because South Carolina, I've agreed since before I thought about this, South Carolina is going to be a tough game. Lenora Sellers is a dual threat QB, right? He's a redshirt freshman for them. He's who they got. They got Rocket Sanders in the backfield for their running back. He comes back to sophomore Arkansas form, and he's healthy. Like, that could be, if Sellers plays up to par, watch out, and then they can mix in Robbie Ashford with some packages, presumably. But they kind of take note and see where they can see Ole Miss's flaws, insert Pete Golding on defense. The question is Shane Beamer smart enough to put that together and kind of figure that out, right? Because he's one of the coaches not in the hot seat, but he's got to have a strong year. And
don't think that defense isn't going to be fired up to be across the line from their ex-teammate, right? Juice Wells. I mean, that adds to this game too. Whether
that's all they care about.
Right. Whether it should be a huge deal or not,
right.
like I think it's going to be a big deal.
Yep. That's like hypo going back to Oklahoma. Everybody's like, oh, it's not that big of a deal. Yeah, it's a big deal to hypo. Like,
the fans are going to be fired up about it too. Like that's what's going to.
Promise.
South Carolina's
it's a big deal on that field.
Yeah.
It's already a tough place to play in Columbia, and now you've given them a reason to get even more fired up, have more of a reason to hate Ole Miss, and to get as loud as they can and try to disrupt the offense and everything throughout. So it's going to be a tough one though. That's the first one I'm really looking at. Also, you get Kentucky at home too. We get our first road test, if you want to call it, at Wake Forest. We should go up there and handle business, though. But it is a true road game against a Power 4 opponent. So that's one we'll be keeping an eye on. Come back, play Kentucky at home, and then put your seatbelt on, because it's that's when it gets real after that with South Carolina, LSU, Oklahoma. You go to Fayetteville, a place that Ole Miss, I don't think we've won in Fayetteville since 2008 when Houston Nutt went back for the first time. I think it's our last win there. Hell, for that matter, I think our last win in Baton Rouge was 2008 too. Really difficult games there with those three road games: Columbia, Baton Rouge, Fayetteville. Not so much Gainesville though. I don't care what you say, Hitch.
Yeah. And when you look at the schedule, I mean, we did get the second easiest schedule in the SEC.
And you got as much of a break as an SEC team is going to get.
I'm not going to argue that, right? Like, but the schedule does line up to be difficult at times, and I mean, I agree. I see 10-2, right? It's Georgia, and then I'm budgeting in a loss from either LSU or Arkansas, and just because Arkansas is in Fayetteville, and I know how this game goes every year, right?
Every time. Every other year at least.
Yeah. And so, everybody we've talked to almost has been at that 10-2. And it wouldn't take a whole lot of convincing to get them to 11-1, right? That I'll take that, right?
Yeah. And on the flip side, it doesn't really take a lot of convincing to get you to 9-3 either. I mean, if I tell you that things went swirly in Baton Rouge and you drop one, then you lose to Georgia, and look, maybe you're looking ahead to LSU and you drop that game in Columbia to South Carolina, or it's that really weird spot between Oklahoma and Georgia where, okay, you're coming off a loss in Baton Rouge, you come home, you beat Oklahoma, and now you've got Georgia ahead of you. But right before you play them, you've got to make that weird trip up to Fayetteville, right? Maybe you overlook them a little bit, and that thing gets hairy, like you said, Hick. So,
listen to us sounding like Ole Miss fans. We're back to sounding like Ole Miss fans,
man. We've done this before. We have seen this story. We've read this book. We know how this movie ends, right? But I think if you told me, so I think 10-2. If you told me I was off by a game, I would tell you that I think we go 11-1.
Yeah.
I'm not going to sit here and discount somebody that says, well, no, you're going to go 9-3 though, because you can see that scenario playing out, because this is the SEC. You can't count any road games as for sure wins in this league. So that wouldn't take a lot of convincing whatsoever for me.
I think 10-2 is where I see it, but to be fair, 10-2 is arguably the new 11-1, 12-0 in the SEC with the additions of Texas and Oklahoma, and you're playing Oklahoma as one of the teams. So the increase in the league, like it's going to be hard for Georgia to go undefeated. Kirby Smart's had one undefeated season since he's been at Georgia, and you think he's going to have two now with Texas and Oklahoma in the league? No, and he plays in Austin for one of those games. So I think to give credit to Ole Miss, like on the surface, I hate it too, right? Because this is probably your most talented roster, and Lord knows how long, maybe the best one ever. And you're like, let's just assume it was 2023 or before. That's probably like 11-1 might be a disappointment. So I get it. If some fans may look at 10-2 and be like, geez, with that roster, because it's an expanded SEC with Texas and Oklahoma. So.
Yeah, it's going to be incredibly difficult, ready to get it going. Before we get out of here, Peter.
And just to hammer that home, it's like it really is there a difference in 10-2 and 11-1? right? Like the goal is to get to the playoff, right? And you get to the playoff, then that's when your record starts to matter, right? Get in the top 12, and then when you're 3-0 or whatever you have to run to get there, then you try to go 3-0 at that point.
Yep.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. So, well, before we get out of here, Peter, let's talk about potential SEC playoff teams. We've already talked about Ole Miss potentially being one of those teams. We've obviously touched on Georgia. You have the likely candidates, Alabama, Texas, that everybody always talks about as well. Let's go a tier below that. I like getting people's thoughts on who might be able to sneak up into the playoffs that's underneath that top four, whether it be LSU, Oklahoma, Tennessee. I really like Tennessee this year. I think they can have a really good year. I'm high on A&M just because of their schedule. I think they have a chance to make a run. Missouri, they're in the same boat, really talented with an easier SEC schedule as well. So is there one or two teams from that group that you think might be able to make a run to make the playoffs here out of the SEC?
So I got to give you three because I can't narrow it down. LSU, Tennessee, and Oklahoma would be the third. LSU and Tennessee, I think, can be understandable by a lot of folks. LSU does lose their quarterback. However, every team's got a question mark, right? I mean, you can point to it on every single team. And there's just happens to be quarterback. What it doesn't happen to be is offensive line with 4 or 5 returning, including 2 first-round draft picks. So that protection is very, 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 very valuable. They have some receivers that just haven't gotten a turn yet because of Brian Thomas Jr., Malik Neighbors, and Kyron Lacey and Chris Hilton, and they got to transfer C.J. Daniels from Liberty, who's apparently lighting it up. Mason Taylor,
apparently, yeah.
That's a really good roster. And Brian Kelly, year 3. I mean, it's been talked about all off season. That's when he gets it clicking. And then they got Blake Baker on defense now. And it'll be a good LSU team. Tennessee depends a lot on Nico. I think it ride or die with them. I see a lot of improvement with Nico from start to finish, just because it is what it is. This is going to be his first full year starting as a quarterback. He's going to gain confidence as the season goes along. Heupel's got that rowing in the right direction. I was wrong on Heupel because a few years ago I questioned because of the regression at UCF. I just anticipated the same thing, and I think it's not concrete yet because he hasn't truly shown it, but I think I'm wrong just because of the trend and the recruits he's bringing in, has brought in, and Nico and all that. But I see Nico.
There's excitement. Yeah, Tennessee football has excitement.
Exactly. In Oklahoma, Venables, right? I mean, they hired him for a reason. They knew they were going to the SEC. They needed a defensive-minded coach, even if they want to say, no, we didn't know we were going when we hired him. They knew. So this guy's beat, and granted, he was a defensive coordinator, not a head coach. He beat Saban twice at Clemson for national championships, and one time they blew him out of the water. And also, people want to compare Oklahoma to Texas a lot, and if you want to do that, I hope you do, because year 2, Sarkisian was 8-5 at Texas. Venables was 10-3. And beat the Longhorns in year 2. So, if anything, if we're comparing those two, Venables is ahead of the game compared to where Sark was in year 2. The knock on Oklahoma, again, every team has question marks. Jackson Arnold at quarterback, new quarterback, similar to Nico, first year starting redshirt freshman, their whole offensive line. And apparently, Arnold hasn't been doing that well in spring ball because he's throwing a lot of picks. But it could be because the offensive line. We just don't know. But that team's built on defense. They got Danny Stutzman and Billy Bowman back, and that's why they hired Venables. So that's how I see it.
Yeah, the Oklahoma thing, there's no doubt that the defense is going to be one of the best that anybody on their schedule plays all year long. They've got that defense rolling. They're elite on that side of the ball. The questions I have with Oklahoma, like you said, Jackson Arnold coming in, first year starting, having to do it in the SEC, and that offensive line, they lost all 5 starters, whether it be going pro or to the transfer portal last year. So they're having to break in 5 new starters coming into this league. That's going to be an absolute grind for them. Their defense will be able to keep them in games to maybe long enough to where they can get those things sorted out and worked out. So maybe they'll have some time earlier in the season to get those things hammered out to give that defense a little bit of help.
Let me add a 4th team to that, because you Peter, you put this bug in my head just a second ago when you were talking about South Carolina and Lenore Sellers, right? And Rocket Sanders back there in the backfield, right?
Yeah.
Looking at their schedule, right? I mean, they get LSU at home, they get Ole Miss at home, they get Texas A&M at home, they get Missouri at home, right? I mean, if you look at their schedule, there are, at Alabama, at Oklahoma. Those are the two, big road tests. I'm not throwing away Ole Miss and LSU coming there, right? But, I mean, if things start flowing right in Columbia,
yeah,
I mean, you look up and this team might be there too with this schedule and the talent they have on the roster and Shane Beamer up there at the head coaching position, right? I mean, it's not out of the question, I don't think.
Yeah. Kentucky too. Yeah. Kentucky returned a lot, 9 of 11 on defense, including, I'm going to get the name wrong, De'Aaron King, or that's not it, but King is the last name, I believe, the lineman. He's going to be a top 10 Letterman tackles last year, and then bringing in Brock Vandegrift. All he's done is been at Georgia for 3 years behind Stetson Bennett and Carson Beck on 2 national title teams. So that's a good thing.
Yeah.
And then they return their whole offensive line, top 2 receivers. I actually pegged them to maybe beat Georgia in Lexington early. So
that'd be a big one.
If that happens, we'll see. That puts more juice around that Ole Miss game, right? Because I think
I'll tell you what, buddy, if that happens, we might as well just throw everything away and just start over, right?
Just start over, right? Yeah.
Hey, I'm all about the upset.
Me too. Just give me it. I did not so much, but I love it. Get Agent of Chaos. I just give it to me. I'll deal with it my own way.
That's right. Yeah, it's going to be real exciting once it finally gets started. And look, we're not that far away now. Week 0 comes up next weekend. Week 1, 2 weeks away here, and then we're really going to be in the thick of this thing for the next few months. So ready to get that started. Peter, before we get out here, why don't you let everybody know how they can find your stuff, your articles, and stuff like that?
Yeah, thanks. So you can find me on X at Pigskin Petey. The link to the website Southbound and Down is there. We put out like 3 or 4 articles every couple days. Today, for example, I just did one predicting that I don't do streamline. I don't do necessarily like this team's going to win this game. I did 5 conference upsets today, I think, and then also did yesterday college game day site location predictions for ESPN just because it's fun.
That's a fun one. That's what I like, getting outside of the actual game on the field and like reading articles on not the festivities, but what surrounds it, right? Like things like that. That's interesting.
I did good. I did one on the best locker room speeches to pump you up for workouts, like just ran. And of course, Kirby Smart's in there, Nick Saban's in there, and the last one to share was just did it because fantasy football is coming up. 5 former SEC players to draft in fantasy football this year. So,
cool.
Nice. Yeah. But thank you. That's where I appreciate you guys having me.
Heck yeah,
man. And also on Twitter, if y'all follow him at Pigskin Petey, he does a really good job of doing several spaces every week too, just for people to hop in and talk college football, right? Just try to get fans together, and it's not always just SEC related. Like I hopped in one earlier today, and y'all were talking about Miami, right? So I just kind of had that playing while I was doing around the house. So it's a lot of fun to hop in there and get a lot of different perspectives from SEC teams and teams outside of the SEC as well. So you do a really good job with that. So Peter, we appreciate y'all.
It's like the old sports radio, right? Almost like you're the DJ and on your space, and the guy comes in. You have callers come in and give you their opinion. Yeah, that's cool. Nice.
That's right. So, well, Peter, appreciate you joining us here tonight. And also, if y'all want to support our show, y'all can right down there streaming on the bottom line there. Go to omafterdark.myshopify.com. We have Ole Miss After Dark merchandise there and a really good hot sauce made locally here in Pontotoc, Mississippi called Papa Lynn's Hot Sauce. If y'all get on there and y'all order, when you get to checkout, use the promo code SHIP, SHIP, and we will cover all the shipping for you. You'll get free shipping on all of your orders. So use that promo code. You'll get it shipped to you absolutely free. And we appreciate everybody's support. Peter, appreciate you joining us well, buddy. And we'll be talking to you again during the season.
Howdy toddy, guys. Thanks. Good to see you.
Hell yeah.